Welcome to season 1 of the Make Boards Work podcast. Today's guest is Chuck Bender. You're an early internet entrepreneur, a passionate advocate for building and connecting communities, leveraging technology, and from all I know, a most generous family man and friend. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Let's jump right in. It's quite evident we have a few things in common. We both served in senior roles in EO, both in technology. Less obvious, possibly, is that we both served in the armed forces. And I didn't say Army. I was very close to saying Army, but I think in your case with the Navy, that probably would have been a bad start. So armed services came to mind. What did the Navy teach you which affected your leadership style? And specifically, which learnings can you transfer into the boardroom?
Wow, that's a great question. I think, I learned a lot about structure and process in leadership. I think those are the things that really resonated the most for me. I think clarity of role, clarity of work product, clarity of what you are supposed to do each day. In order to work together as part of a team, in order to move a ship around the world. One of the things I often lamented when I was in the Navy was the micromanagement. There was a lot of, the interesting thing is your senior leaders are, all under 30. They're still trying to figure out leadership. So it's a big experiment in leadership, but what I did get, I actually just released a newsletter. I just drafted it yesterday, actually, around this. But you really will adapt to the environment that you're in far more than the words on a wall, right? So in the military, the environment, the backdrop, the water you're swimming in, is built around authority, structure, precision, rules, and you tend to just automatically fall into line because that's the way the environment expects you to be, right? So yeah. I was really thinking about this a lot more recently, particularly as it relates to I'm a big Seahawks fan. We just won the Super Bowl, and was looking and really garnering lessons from what Mike McDonald's created there as a coach, and it was a very similar thing. It's like, what is the environment? What are the expectations of being in the environment? And as a leader, and the military's had traditions for hundreds of years around this, or thousands of years, depending on how far you want to go back. But it is about, here's how things work, here's where things go, here's what you do, and here's who you report to, who they report to, chain of command, and so I think the environment in the military really set up the chance for people to automatically fall into line. I think the processes were probably the area that more translated into my business. So in the Navy, I was a fire controlman. So basically I worked on weapons systems. So we worked on fire control computers and radar and basically made sure that if we shot something, it hit where we aimed. Right, that was kind of the main thing. And every day we woke up and we had what was called a planned maintenance card. And that planned maintenance card had a list of things that needed to be done around the equipment, around the doors, around everything. There was literally a PMS card for everything. And what it allowed for was 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds to be able to effectively take highly technical equipment and maintain it on a daily basis without having to know every part of the equipment intimately, right? Which is really something that I've thought about as our company's expanded and as we've grown. Or what are the systems and processes that we have in place that make it easy for our team to be successful, right? What does it take to be successful, and what does that documentation look like? Now, I'm not as bad as the Navy. I mean, they would tell you which hand to grab the screwdriver, and and you turn the screw right or left, and you could be court-martialed if you didn't turn the screw the right way,
Yep.
right? So it was
Yep.
very, very, the penalties are high, you know.
Rigid. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but I did learn a lot about how to take sophisticated systems and processes and break them
Mm-hmm.
down into simple,
Mm-hmm.
um, relatively easy to do functions. And that's really helped as an IT provider. We do a lot of that
Yes.
kind of stuff.
Yeah. There's quite a few things that I'd love to follow up. I'll start. You talked about one key element that you gained clarity on, which is kind of this clarity of roles, right? And now translate to boardroom. I think there's one delineation of roles that is very, very crucial and very hard to get right, which is board or chairman, chairperson to CEO, kind of which calls are with the chairperson or the board, and what is the remit of the CEO. What's your view there? How do they collaborate? Kind of who calls which shots? What's the culture in your boards, your companies there?
So that's really interesting. So I'm wholly owned. So I have advisory boards. Um, and the role that I use with the advisory board is basically to help me manage my blind spots. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
as a CEO, I have my strengths, but I have my weaknesses, right? So I literally try to build a board to manage around my weaknesses. Like, what am I missing? What do I need? What are the opportunities? When I was in nonprofits as a president of an organization, it's a little bit different. Same concept. You're more operational as a board in a nonprofit than depending on the nonprofit, but or
Yes.
the level, right? But the but in my companies, I essentially what I do is I create a standard, and the standard is this: here's what I'm reporting on. Here's my accountabilities. I need you to hold me both accountable to what we've agreed that we're doing, but I need you to be a resource for me when I find myself in uncertainty, right? Or worse, when I'm absolutely certain and I'm wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's those are the
Mm-hmm.
those that's the really the bad spot to be as a CEO.
The
So
high
um,
conviction wrong decisions.
yes, exactly, exactly. So so I think a lot of times the relationship with the board is going to be dependent on what your needs are
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
environment that you're in.
Yeah.
Where I'm an investor in a company, our
Yeah.
boards are very different, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
more of an
Mm-hmm.
oversight role. So I think boards
Yeah.
show up in a lot of different ways
Yeah.
and depends
Yeah.
on kind of the lens that you're living in.
So, what I say, as an investor, there's also this element of oversight. Absolutely, yes, has to be, and most likely there's fiduciary duties along those lines as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that I framed it beautifully, manage around my weaknesses, right? And help me to manage and detect my blind spots. How to balance both, right? There needs to be an element of oversight, especially if you have a cap table, if you have not wholly owned. And at the same time, there should be also the support. I would say my shortest definition of the board's role is support and challenge.
Yeah.
But how do you keep that balance? How do you make that a healthy balance?
Well, I think in so much as you can determine who's on the board and the
Mm-hmm.
types of
Mm-hmm.
personalities that are
Yeah.
on the board, you can tailor it. But I think it starts with an honest conversation with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think with so many things in life, to know thyself is a true gift. But that's being honest about your strengths, your weaknesses, your proclivities, and then figuring out how to find the people who are able to navigate those with you, right? So I think in advisory boards, what I'm looking for is healthy conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I try to find people on my boards who will challenge my assumptions, um, just to double check them, right? But do it in a way that's fact based,
Yeah.
not reactionary, not emotional. I mean, I will dive into facts all day long, and I'm willing to change my mind if the facts present something differently than what I assume. But sometimes I go with my gut, and I need somebody who's going to really say, "Is that your gut talking, or what's the data say?" So I think that I think there's real advantage. to tailoring the board. But even if you're working with an investor where you can't really define who the board members are, you can certainly help them help you, right? So,
Yes.
here's what my strengths and weaknesses are. Here are the areas where I could really use some stuff. And one of the things I noted was that the strengths and weaknesses aren't just financial business operations. They're cultural insensitivities and they're generational insensitivities.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a Gen X guy, right? We are notorious for being resilient, grit, no nonsense, and we don't really have a lot of sensitivity towards emotional stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that really showed up actually on my EO board. There was there, and I can tell you more about that if you care to. But I think it's one of those things where I think understanding where I am in the world today is broader than relationships and connections and business acumen. It's also just understanding the workforce,
Yes.
and
Yes.
how do they get behind what I say, or how do I communicate something better? So I don't know if that's answering your question specifically,
No.
but that's one of the things I really think about.
Totally. You mentioned the notion of healthy conflict, and I think again it's a beautiful image. It's a beautiful allegory. Quite recently, I was asked warning signs of a dysfunctional board, and one thing that came to mind that I mentioned is board that has no conflict, and the board that has basic conflict all the time. Those probably are warning signs, but I very deliberately said there's really the sweet spot where there is conflict, but it's healthy conflict. It's constructive. It's engaged, but data driven. Really all aligned towards a best solution, an optimal outcome for the benefit of the company of all the stakeholders. So any tips and tricks you use again both in your company, your advisory board, but also where you invest, where you probably have a bit more of an oversight function as well. Kind of how to best work towards that healthy conflict zone.
So I think that every one of my organizations has a common core value. It's build trusted relationships. The core value of building a trusted relationships means that we are trusting each other's intention. We're trusting each other's work ethic. We're not bringing more elements to the story than what we're dealing with at the moment, right? So I think the exercises that actually in the time together outside of the boardroom,
Yes.
the time together where you're learning about each other, where you can be vulnerable, those are those moments where that trust is really cemented. And leadership, and I've often said this from stage, but I think that that it's truly impossible to know somebody deeply and not love them, right? And that's a hard thing to wrap your head around sometimes, right? There are people out there you just don't like, but if you take the time to get to know them and you take the time to understand their concerns and you take the time to see them as a human being who's flawed and has fears and all the things that we do, you develop an empathy for them, and that tightens a relationship, and they also get the chance to develop it with you. But it starts with setting your ego aside and being, listen, this is what I need. This is how you can help me. How can I help you? This is, and this is where I struggle. And I think there's a lot of posturing that can happen in boardrooms.
Yes.
And posturing is the road to conflict that's not healthy. I think just integrity and clear communication and recognizing that everybody has a common intention makes all the difference in the world.
Beautiful. Two things I'd love to follow up, and again, they're anchors of in my framework as well, in my book, trust on the one side, and this ego. Let's start with the ego, because most people who serve in boardrooms have accomplished something, right? That's probably why they're asked to be in the boardroom, and with that often comes confidence, and that's healthy, but that also is a fine line to ego. So how to keep these high confidence people, these sometimes high ego people, how to keep that part in check in the boardroom to, again, strive for this healthy conflict and not the posturing that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think the easiest way for me to do that is to call it out in myself publicly in the boardroom and
Wow.
demonstrate what it looks like to see this as something that I'm trying to work on and ask everybody to work on it collectively, right? I have a huge ego. I don't think anybody who does anything can do anything without an ego. I think our
Yeah.
ego is what gives us the confidence to try and take risks.
Yeah.
I think it often gets conflated with toxic ego, which is all about me all the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's there so I there is a line around that. Some of the most challenging people I've had to work with initially have become some of my favorite people to work with after we've had that breakthrough of ego, where they're not having to perform for me and I'm not having to perform for them,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but sometimes it's being able to coach through it. You have to ask the question: Are we performing, or are we trying to get to a common solution?
Yeah.
So it doesn't. It's not foolproof. But I do find that most of the time the fools identify themselves pretty quickly, and you can do something about it.
Do you have a? I found that beautiful. You know, very self-aware and vulnerable to say, okay, I have an ego, and I sometimes one of very effective means is to call myself out for having played to my ego. Anything specific that comes to mind where you have done that recently? I mean, I know it's quite personal, but I found it very, very insightful.
Well, let me see. I think I'm in a battle with my ego every day. I think let's see, what's probably the most recent example? Interestingly, I'm far better at it now than I was. I think the ego often gets, I'll equate ego to performance. When the more imposter syndrome I have,
Yeah.
the more I feel like I need to perform, the more sensitive my ego is to challenge, right?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
um, where I am now in my life, and I think this is just a function of maturity, maybe I've settled down. um, in my 30s, I was like, I have to prove myself every day, right? Um,
Yeah.
Now I feel like I don't need to prove myself at all. I just need to add value. So I think the conversations that I can to try to have with people who are a little bit earlier in that process is just to ask them how they want to be seen. How do you want to be? I had an EO president who was probably the biggest ego I've ever met to this day, and we ended up turning out to be fantastic friends because I was 3 years ahead of his ego. I probably had the same exact ego when I was in that position, the time before, and I was
Yes.
like, hey, listen, how do you want to be known? How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be perceived? Because you get to decide that. You can choose it based on the actions and how you show up. So, you know, just ask yourself that question before you open your mouth, and suddenly you'll find yourself aligned pretty quickly.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I think for me more recently, I think I don't know. I bet you if you asked my wife, she would tell you.
Yeah. Same here. Same. Can relate to that. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I get some very unfiltered feedback there as well.
Yeah, that's why we love them.
Yes. Totally. Totally. On the notion of trust, and again, I'm very aligned with you that as a board, to build trust in the boardroom, I need to intentionally spend also time kind of together outside of the boardroom and get to know each other at the personal level. And that is not so easy because a board is a quite specific type of, it is a team as well, but there's a few specific things that make it more difficult to gel as a team and to build trust as a team. For one, the meeting frequency is relatively low, typically, right? Lower than most other teams. Second, I think a key factor also that makes it more difficult is for most people on the board, it's not their primary role, right? If the CEO also serves on the board, most typically, her primary role is CEO. The investor is primarily a venture capitalist and has his investors and his fellow partners and all that, and kind of it's a board role of many with their portfolio companies. So that makes trust building even more challenging. So spending time, yes, but how, maybe more specifically, how do you intentionally build trust in the boardroom?
I think it starts with curiosity, listening. When someone shares something, ask deeper questions about it. Trust that you're willing to hear them out. I find the principles of reciprocity work just as well in the boardroom as they do anywhere else in life, right?
Yeah.
So if I want to be heard and I want to be listened to, it makes more sense for me to model that and hear and listen, right? I actually went through a master class in that when I was president of the EO chapter in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
So I had my hand-selected board. The incoming president wanted to do a retreat, which was, in my view, really risky for our chapter. Our chapter had a mandatory retreat where all members were expected to attend. She wanted to take everybody to another country. It's a extra $3,000 or $4,000 out of their pocket that they didn't necessarily agree to. So I had all my reasons why I thought it was a bad idea. And I was fired up to kill this thing in the crib before it ever got where it was going to go. And then our mutual friend, David Nilsson, shows up in the office because he was asked to be the retreat planner. So he goes to my board and he says, and he totally knows me. He knows me so well. He comes in and he says, okay, well, what I'd love to do is just make sure everybody's voice is heard. So I'm just going to give a baton and let's go around the room and then have each person just share a pro and a con one at a time. And we'll go through the room until everybody's gotten all their things out. And I had like 30 things, but but we started and it started with one person. They shared their one reason why they thought it would be exciting. And the next person did it. And I shared my one thing that was negative, and then it went around and then it went around. And then my own board ended up voting against my wishes for this thing because how brilliantly he forced us to all to listen.
Yeah.
So I think there was that was such a lesson for me, and that was a while ago, but that was a huge lesson in how do you hear everybody else's point of view rather than your own voice all the time, But that created trust, actually, even for him losing the thing, right? Because they learned something. So, I mean, I'll tease him that we ended up not doing it for the same reasons that I had expressed, but he got my board on board, so that was good.
Nice. Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful example also how important facilitation can be, right? How you conduct the discussion, because this could easily have gone down a rabbit hole with somebody just starting with 30 points, right? And a lot of people not feeling heard and be able to express themselves, and some louder voices in the room and some more silent, but probably quite substantial statements. I think it's a beautiful example how important facilitation, a structure facilitation can be for a good board dynamics.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I learned a lot.
Fantastic. Funny enough, I think when I asked you about trust, you immediately jumped to curiosity as one key originator or source of building trust. And again, this is, I think, a very, very important notion, because when you look at the board, very often, some have more knowledge in some areas. For example, typically, the CEO and her team, CEO and his team, they know the business inside out. They're 24/7 on the business. They know every client, every employee, depending on large company, the partners, their whatever. They know it. They're on it all the time. The board has more distance, right? But maybe they know more about transactions. Maybe they've done 50 M&A deals, and for the CEO, it's the first one, or whatever it is. So I think they're keeping their curiosity and says, yeah, maybe I have more domain expertise, but that does not mean I have the better answer, right? How do you keep that curiosity, that Shoshin mindset that we refer to in EO, that, beginner's mind, and not say, okay, I know it, but rather, okay, maybe I know a lot, but I still hear, I listen, and probably jointly we come to even better conclusions. How do you nurture the curiosity, given that somehow you have know-how advantages or disadvantages?
I think, well, for me, it starts with not being afraid of disagreement, right? So I'm not afraid to hear an alternative point of view. I embrace them because, again, I think more minds are better than one mind, especially if there's some conflict.
Yeah.
One of the things I don't like about our political parties is they become like these litmus tests of association. Um, I don't want a board with a litmus test of association. I want a bunch of
Yes.
sharp people who are going to bring really sharp, pointy questions to the table. And I think that makes me feel like I have to defend myself better or defend the idea better. And if it can't withstand scrutiny, then it's probably a bad idea, right? But that comes back to just leadership styles. My style
Yeah.
is to seek out that conflict. It's to try and shake it out of the tree. I mean, I really do. Um, but I think the curiosity, maintaining it as, I mean, I try to select curious people. But I also find that the curiosity doesn't survive judgment. Because once you
Yeah.
pass judgment on something, you think you're right. You know, you think you have the answer now, the only one. There is no other answer. So I think suspending judgment helps to form more curiosity. Um, Coming to the best likely outcome is what we're all after, not the perfect outcome. I think the way we frame a question often makes a difference.
Yeah.
So if we say we're looking for the right answer, boy, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting to the right answer. But if we're trying to get right answers that
Yeah.
move us forward and then we can pick up those, then we're going to get a much better outcome, I think.
Yes. Beautiful. Yeah. Love that. Love that. For a board member to ask these pointy questions that you want them to ask, I need to be well informed as a board director. And again, I'm not on the business 24/7, right? I might have a quarterly or a bi-monthly board rhythm. I get information. How do you keep your advisory board members for your own company well informed enough that they're in a position that they have enough context to ask pointy questions? What are the tools you use to keep them up to date, to keep them sufficiently prepared for good board meetings, for asking pointy questions?
So I think that there are pivot points, right? There are certain areas where decisions. I often think of where it's uncertainty, right? Where I'm finding myself in water that I'm not quite sure how deep it is, or how far it is to the next island. Um, but it really starts with thinking of your board as a resource, not an adversary. I think a lot of CEOs can find themselves in hot water by treating their board as though it's an adversary, as opposed to a resource.
Yeah.
I think,
Yes.
and then I think sharing kind of what those inflection points are. They don't need to know every detail, but they need to know the where you're trying to go, what you're struggling with specifically, why you're struggling with it, right? And sometimes that's just an honest question. Sometimes it's just fear of failure. Sometimes it's I don't fear the unknown. Sometimes I have 60% of the information I feel I need to make the answer, and I don't know if that's enough. And I'm looking for the board to help me determine if that's enough information to move or to take action on. So, but I think when asking the board for their insight, what I need to do is I need to fully frame the problem for them. I
Yeah.
believe that if you fall in love with problems, not solutions,
Yeah.
you're going to get a better outcome. And so I think in terms of like a board book or whatever I'm presenting, I want to present the problem. I want
Yeah.
to present the options on the table. I want to present in the military, we called it staff work, right? Staff work
Yeah.
was this notion of you have to have every scenario placed in front of them with a recommendation
Hmm.
that the answers you've already done all the basic staff work for them so
Yes.
they can look at all
Yes.
the information to make a choice, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so in those cases, I have to treat my job and the role of my executive team as the people who are generating the staff work to provide that information to the board so they
Yes.
can review it alongside me
Yep.
and say, okay,
Yep.
you know, I see this. Maybe are you seeing this too, or are you not seeing it? Well, whatever. But you have to be open to the dialogue. You have to see them as a resource, and you have to share openly.
Again, mirroring one thing I really loved that you mentioned is this seeing the board as a CEO, as the owner, seeing the board as a resource and not as an adversary. And I think there's several elements to that that really make this super powerful. And one thing that I often convey in the boards I serve is that, the board pack, if you prepare a board pack, that it's not seen as homework for the board, a kind of entertainment for the board, but really as a luxury, very similar to our 5% reflections in EO, to step away from the daily grind and say, okay, what are the 2, 3 big things? And then, where I can use support, that I want to share, where I feel under pressure, where I feel uncertain, whatever, and make these the anchor points. And that luxury to take that step away from the daily grind and write things down, I think that's such a different mindset than I prepare the board pack for the board, right? That's just wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think different boards will ask for different information, right?
Yes.
But I think the key to happiness in every relationship are fully articulated expectations that are agreed to by all parties. So when working with a board, I think you need to sit down and come to an agreement about what their expectations are, what you're hoping to get, make sure they're aligned around these types of decisions when they come up. So what do you need so I'm not wasting your time? What do
Right.
you need? Be respectful of it. Um, what is it you're hoping to see from me to make your job easier? What sense of clarity? And you'll get some people who want to know every minute detail, and you're going to get some people who want just an executive summary, right?
Yes.
And they feel that
Yes.
that's good enough. So I tend to start with the executive summary and then
Hmm.
support with
Hmm.
minute detail, and they can go as deep
Yeah.
as they want.
Yes. Yes.
you know?
Yes. Do you take some elements, again, in your own board or where you serve possibly as an investor, do you take some more on the information sharing part offline, or I prefer to call it asynchronously, to have like shared documents where you can have like Q&A that you kind of really use the precious together time that be it on Zoom or be it in the boardroom for really constructive dialogue, for these pointed questions, for the healthy conflict, and not for just kind of information updates, status updates, for those things.
I absolutely agree with that. I think you're wasting people's times. If it could be in an email, you shouldn't be doing it at the board meeting,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Um,
Yes.
and there's some presumptions inside of that, though. It presumes that the board people have read it, that they're taking the time to prepare for the meeting,
Yep.
um, and that you gave them the right information for them to be prepared for the meeting. But I tend to think that I was joking with a colleague recently because he's taking these ideas to the board and he doesn't know what the board thinks already. And I'm like, well, that's kind of like not doing the homework, right? Like if you haven't floated some ideas past board members and gotten a green light, red light concerns for you're really wasting the entire board's time when you throw something at them that they haven't seen before. So,
Yes. Yeah.
I really think that these are all relationships. You're going to have individual relationships with individual board members. I think you need to communicate. You need to communicate in a way that frames the issues prior to seeing some random thing in a board book. Um, and I'm kind of old school. I think that I should know the vote before I walk in the room, right? I should already know how it's going to go. If
Yes.
I didn't do my homework.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
but it's not as a means to manipulate. It's a means to really vet the idea. You know.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes.
but yes, I do think you have a living documents with the issues you're dealing
Mhm.
with. Here are the core updates based on, boards have different areas of oversight, right? So you're
Yeah.
going to have a financial oversight function, and there's a person in there that'll be really more specifically there for that. It might be an
Yes.
investor's oversight or whatever. You might have an operational oversight. You might
Correct.
have, there are different skills that people are going to bring. So, I want them all to attack this, whatever the issue is, from their lens and leave their feedback prior to it. So I'm prepared to answer their questions when I go into the meeting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Any anecdote that comes to mind where the board was of really supreme value to you, or also, where a board really disappointed, where something really went off in some board work you were involved in?
Um, Whenever I see boards really going off the rails, in my experience, it's been when they forget what they're supposed to be there to do,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
or you have a weak CEO.
Yeah.
So I've had situations where the CEOs have been aspirational, but not necessarily uh, delivering. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the board can become very toxic to that person if they're not clear, have clear accountabilities, and then
Yeah.
have an action plan in place to deal with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So I think as a board member, it's important for me to have an operating principle from within the board. Like, how are we going to agree to disagree? How are we going to operate, move forward? How are we going to process the worst case scenarios? I think of it almost like a shareholder agreement. You pre-negotiate all the divorce before you get started.
Yeah.
I think it's similar as a board. You need to be super clear about who's doing what and why, and then how do you manage these sorts of issues that are really thorny, that come up. Where I've seen them really come apart is when they start pointing fingers at each other
Yes. Yes.
instead of
Yes.
at the problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I there's very little time in a crisis to point fingers at each other. You can get to a postmortem and
Yeah.
figure out what cause and effect
Yes.
happened at some future date. What you have to do is you have to deal with the crisis in front of
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
and any energy that's spent on finding blame as opposed to finding solutions is wasted energy. Um, so I think those are the kinds of things as a board chair. I think that's the board chair's role, is to bring us back to the
To
solutions.
orchestrate. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and really manage that tension in the room.
Yeah.
Because there's often a lot of money at stake. There's mistakes that can cost people millions and millions of
Right.
dollars.
Yeah. Or
And
risk the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I think I don't know if that's answering your question directly, but I mean, my experience has been fewer times have I seen that happen. Mostly when I was younger,
Yeah.
and often when all of the things that we started out with in this conversation weren't addressed or dealt with early enough, or
Mm-hmm.
weren't
Yeah.
selected
They
correctly,
built.
right? We just,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the higher the ego, the more
Yeah.
likely you're looking for blame. The higher
Yes.
the not being solutions oriented, worried about shedding responsibility
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to embracing problems. Those are all people that I really would try to figure out how to get off of the board
Yeah.
really, really quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving to my final question, Chuck. If you could build your dream board and you can add, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4 dream people, even people who are not, alive anymore. Just what's your all-star board? How would it look like and why?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Um, I'm going to shoot from the hip on this because I didn't really prepare for this question. I would I would want somebody who is um, like it's so funny because I always think of these icons in business when I'm asked this question. I'll think
Mm-hmm.
like, what's a Steve Jobs or a Bill
Yeah.
Gates look like on a board? And then I can imagine a Steve Jobs on a board, and that would be just nightmare. freaking nightmare, right? It would look good, but oh my God, I can't, I don't know if my ego could take his constructive
Yes,
criticism.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
so, I think, for me, I'm more of a philosopher. So I want somebody who is going to help me ask the right questions. So
Yes.
in that sense, I would look for somebody like a Abe Lincoln, right?
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
or
Yeah.
somebody who's going to be um, able to reflect back on what my weaknesses are and a way to help me see them, is a super important thing for me. I think I would want, um, you know, shit. If I could get Warren Buffett on my board, now that's a guy I would learn anything from all the time, and he is not a high ego guy. So Buffett
Yes.
would
Yes.
definitely be
Yeah.
somebody I would love to have. Um, I think, I'd like to say a Musk thing, but I don't know if I can handle that one either. I don't know. I think somebody like that would just push me, in ways that would be really interesting. But somebody with that intelligence, right? Somebody
Yes.
who's got
Yes.
the
Yeah.
ability to just kind of cut through the mess. Um,
Yeah.
if I look at
Yeah.
people I actually know, like when I think of people I know that I would want on a board, I have a former forum mate. His name's Dean Dorcas. He's in my will. I would want him on my
Okay.
board, right?
Nice.
He's actually
Yes.
kind of on
Yes.
my board today. I think
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
he's definitely an advisor. But the reason he is because he's curious, asks questions. He's
Yeah.
financially brilliant.
Yeah.
He's done multiple deals. He's brought
Yeah.
in outside investors. He's done a lot of different things. He's a YPO guy, YPO gold now, guy. Warren Rustand, I would love to have on my board. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
um, just because, he has a way of just looking at me sideways, and it makes me want to be better.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, he
Yes.
could
Yeah.
just he
So
could just
I
look
can
at
really.
me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I really feel like I need to step up and be
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
He
This
doesn't even have to say
look
anything.
like. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know him.
Yeah.
I have another friend. His name is Michael Brown. I'd love to have him on my board. He is a, um, very intense, data driven guy who is also very fun, knows how to laugh, and so these are just people I know. So I think about the people I know in my world, like
Yeah.
what do they bring? There's guys like Sharon, right? You served with
Yeah.
Sharon, you
Yeah.
know. And the on EO's current board, Steve Benitez. I used to
Yeah.
joke that Steve is like that guy who, we were EMP classmates together.
Ah.
He's that
Okay.
guy
Yes.
who is always the last one to say anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But he's kind of like E.F. Hutton, when he does say something, your mind goes, "Oh shit, I didn't think of that," right? Because I
Yeah, and
was too
all
busy
with a very
performing.
soft voice, right?
Yes, all with a very soft voice. He'll just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, here's what I think,
Yeah.
and then he'll just say it, and then I'll feel stupid, right? I mean, because he was like right on the mark, and so those are the kinds of people that I really appreciate. There's another gal who was on my EO board that I invited her to be on my board because she argued with me when I was the forum chair in the EO,
Mm-hmm.
right? I wanted to make a change and she pushed back, and I valued that she pushed back, right?
Yeah.
I needed strong women in my life who could push back on me because frankly, I'm a guy's guy, right? So I need to have strong women in my life who their intention is to love me, but they love me with toughness
Yes.
when it's
Yes. Yeah.
necessary, right?
Tough love.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
so I don't know. I mean, your audience won't know most of these people, but it'll give you a sense of the type of people that I like to surround myself with.
Exactly.
Um,
Fantastic.
Definitely
Cool.
not politically aligned. I don't
Yeah.
care about that.
Yeah.
What I care about is just, directionally aligned and trying to
Mm-hmm.
work towards the
Mm-hmm.
best possible outcome.
Yeah. Beautiful. Chuck, thank you so much. I learned a ton, and I'm very sure our viewers and listeners will take a lot of takeaways, a lot of value from your thinking. Really, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Well, I was honored to be asked to be on your show, so I'm really excited to do it. And if there's ever anything I can do to support you or anybody in your audience, just have them reach out. Happy to chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck.